In the gleaming showroom of Rosen & Shire, one of Chicago's most exclusive watch boutiques, two worlds were about to collide. It was a Tuesday afternoon like any other, until it wasn't. Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, had walked in wearing a simple black hoodie and jeans, looking to browse the latest collection of luxury timepieces. What followed would become a lesson in humility that one store employee would never forget. They say never judge a book by its cover. But for Karen Whitfield, the boutique's senior sales associate with 15 years of experience serving the city's elite, that wisdom had been buried beneath years of assumptions and prejudice. Little did she know that her misjudgment would not only cost her dignity, but nearly her entire career. Sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't need to announce themselves, our source close to the situation told us. And sometimes, the most expensive lesson comes free of charge. The confrontation began with a dismissive glance. It escalated with condescending words. It would end with Karen facing not just Michael Jordan himself, but the harsh mirror of her own prejudice. The following day, what happened at the store would send shockwaves through Chicago's luxury retail community and teach Karen a lesson she'd never expected to learn. What happens when you underestimate a legend? When you look at one of the wealthiest athletes in history and see only the color of his skin? The answer would come swiftly, decisively, and with the kind of poetic justice that can't be scripted. This story isn't just about a luxury watch or even about Michael Jordan. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and how quickly they can unravel when confronted with reality. It's about what happens when someone who's spent their entire life breaking barriers meets someone determined to put up new ones. By the time the dust settled, Karen would learn that some mistakes can't be undone with a simple apology. Some lessons must be learned the hard way. And sometimes, the person you dismiss today might be the one holding your fate in their hands tomorrow. So, what exactly happened in that high-end watch boutique? How did a routine shopping trip transform into a moment that would change lives? And what was the shock that awaited Karen the very next day? Drop a comment where you're watching from today as we dive into this incredible true story of prejudice, power, and the sweetest kind of justice. Because sometimes the most satisfying stories are the ones where people get exactly what they deserve. The Rosen & Shire boutique stood as a monument to luxury in downtown Chicago, its expansive glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun in brilliant golden hues. Inside, the air carried the distinct scent of fine leather and subtle cologne, a carefully crafted atmosphere designed to make those who belonged feel welcome and those who didn't feel noticeably out of place. Italian marble floors gleamed under strategically placed recessed lighting, each illumination highlighting glass cases that housed timepieces worth more than most people's annual salaries. This was the domain of Karen Whitfield, a 45-year-old sales associate whose carefully maintained appearance, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, pearl earrings, and tailored navy suit, spoke volumes about her self-perception. For 15 years, she had cultivated relationships with Chicago's elite, priding herself on her ability to distinguish genuine wealth from aspiration at first glance. Her sales record was impeccable, earning her both significant commissions and the deferential respect of her colleagues. That Tuesday afternoon had begun like any other. The boutique was experiencing its usual mid-week lull, the perfect time for their wealthy regulars to shop in peace, away from weekend crowds. The soft classical music playing through hidden speakers barely masked the sound of hushed conversations as two other associates assisted existing clients. Karen stood poised near the entrance, scanning each potential customer who approached the store with a practiced eye, mentally calculating their worth before they'd even crossed the threshold. 3 blocks away, Michael Jordan had just finished a business meeting regarding his latest investment. Despite his legendary status and estimated fortune of over $2 billion, Jordan had always maintained a certain understated quality when conducting personal business. Today was no exception. Dressed in premium but casual attire, a black hoodie over a simple white t-shirt paired with designer jeans and limited edition sneakers from his own line, he embodied the quiet confidence of someone with nothing to prove. His interest in horology wasn't widely publicized, but Jordan had developed a sophisticated appreciation for fine watches over the years. His collection included rare pieces from Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and Richard Mille, each selected not just as status symbols, but as appreciating assets and works of mechanical art. Today, he had decided to visit Rosen and Shire after hearing about a particular Rolex Daytona model they had acquired, a platinum piece with an ice blue dial that retailed for well over $75,000. The boutique's curved glass doors slid open silently as Jordan entered, the climate-controlled interior a pleasant contrast to Chicago's spring humidity. Two young men near the back of the store did double takes, nudging each other discreetly as they recognized the iconic figure who had just walked in. One whispered excitedly to his companion, but maintained the respectful distance that Chicagoans typically afforded their beloved sports legend. Karen, positioned near the entrance, registered the new arrival with a swift assessment. Her gaze traveled from his casual attire to his relaxed demeanor, missing entirely the subtle indicators of wealth that more discerning eyes would have immediately recognized: the particular cut of his clothes, the quality of the fabric, the limited edition watch already adorning his wrist. Where others might have seen Michael Jordan, basketball legend and billionaire entrepreneur, Karen saw only what her biases allowed her to see: a black man in casual clothes who, in her estimation, didn't belong in her rarefied space. The store manager, Thomas Hanley, was in his office reviewing quarterly sales figures when Jordan arrived. At 38, Thomas had worked his way up from sales associate to management through a combination of product knowledge and genuine people skills. Unlike Karen, he believed luxury should be accessible to anyone who could afford it, regardless of their appearance or background. He had often quietly counseled Karen about her tendency to prejudge customers, warnings that had gone largely unheeded. Jordan moved with unhurried confidence through the showroom, his attention drawn to a particular display case that housed several Rolex models. His hands remained clasped behind his back, a habit developed over years of being careful not to inadvertently damage items in stores where his large frame could easily knock things over. His posture conveyed respect for the space and the items within it. While Karen observed Jordan with growing disapproval, other patrons in the store began to register his presence. A middle-aged couple exchanged excited glances. A business executive discreetly took out his phone, angling it as if checking messages while actually trying to capture a photo of the legend. The two younger sales associates made brief eye contact, silently debating which of them should approach the famous customer. Before either could move, Karen straightened her jacket and stepped forward. Her heels clicked purposefully across the marble floor as she intercepted Jordan's path to the Rolex display. Her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she positioned herself between the basketball icon and the case that had captured his interest. The boutique seemed to hold its breath. The classical music played on, but conversations had ceased. The lighting caught the diamonds in the watches, sending prisms of color dancing across the glass surfaces. Outside, Chicago continued its busy Tuesday afternoon rush, unaware of the drama about to unfold within the prestigious establishment. Jordan glanced up as Karen approached, offering a friendly nod that she did not return. Instead, she clasped her hands before her in a posture that subtly communicated both authority and barrier. The contrast between them was striking: her rigid formality against his relaxed confidence, her obvious judgment against his unassuming presence. In that moment, the stage was set. Karen Whitfield, secure in her position and prejudices, stood face to face with Michael Jordan, a man whose name was synonymous with excellence, whose face was recognized worldwide, and whose net worth dwarfed that of most of the boutique's regular clientele combined. Neither yet realized that this encounter would spiral far beyond a simple transaction, ultimately teaching a lesson that no amount of money could buy and no amount of status could prevent. The hands on the luxury timepieces throughout the store continued their relentless forward movement, counting down to a confrontation that would change at least one life forever. Karen's practiced retail smile remained fixed as she assessed the man before her, completely oblivious to his identity. Years of working with Chicago's elite had given her a false confidence in her ability to categorize people at a glance. In her mind, luxury customers fit specific profiles, and this casual visitor didn't match any of them. "Can I help you find something?" Karen asked, her tone carrying that particular blend of politeness and condescension she reserved for those she deemed out of place. Her body language formed a subtle barrier between Jordan and the display case containing the most expensive pieces in the collection. Michael Jordan offered a genuine smile, either missing or choosing to ignore the undertones in her greeting. "Thank you. I'm interested in looking at the platinum Daytona with the ice blue dial. I understand you have one in stock." Karen's eyebrows rose slightly at his specific request. The watch he mentioned was one of their most exclusive pieces, priced well into six figures. "That's a very specialized timepiece," she replied, making no move toward the display case where it was housed. "Perhaps I could show you something more, accessible?" The word hung in the air between them, its implication clear. Two customers browsing nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing both the famous basketball player and the inappropriate treatment he was receiving. Jordan's expression remained composed, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, not anger, but recognition of a familiar situation. "I'm specifically interested in the Daytona today," he stated calmly. "I'd appreciate the chance to see it." Karen gave a thin-lipped smile. "Of course, browsing is open to everyone, but I should mention that particular model is priced at $75,000. She emphasized the amount as if stating an impossible sum. "It's one of our investment pieces." "I'm familiar with the value," Jordan responded evenly. "I've been collecting watches for some time now." Karen's dismissive glance took in his casual attire once more. "Collecting is quite different from purchasing, sir. These Rolex pieces are serious investments, not fashion accessories." Her tone had grown progressively more patronizing. "Perhaps you'd like to start with something that might be more within reach. We do have some entry-level luxury brands." By now, the other sales associates had recognized the basketball legend and were watching the interaction with growing horror. One of them, Jason, a younger associate who had grown up idolizing Jordan, looked ready to intervene, but remained frozen in disbelief at what was unfolding. "I understand the difference," Jordan replied, his voice remaining measured despite the obvious disrespect. "I currently own several Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and yes, Rolex timepieces. The Daytona would complement my collection nicely." Karen's expression shifted slightly, but her preconceptions remained firmly in place. Rather than recognizing her error, she doubled down, interpreting his knowledge as posturing. "Well, you certainly know the right names to mention," she said with a condescending chuckle. "But knowing about watches and being able to afford them are quite different matters." The tension in the boutique had become palpable. A couple who had been browsing quietly in the corner now stood watching openly, the husband whispering urgently to his wife. One of them appeared to be recording discreetly on their phone. Jordan glanced around, becoming aware of the attention the interaction was drawing. With the patience of someone who had faced prejudice throughout his life, even at the height of his fame and success, he made one more attempt. "I understand you're trying to do your job, but I am seriously interested in purchasing the watch today. If you prefer, I can speak with another associate." Karen's posture stiffened at what she perceived as a challenge to her authority. "I've been with Rosen & Shire for 15 years, she stated coolly. "I assure you, I'm more than qualified to determine which pieces best suit our clients' needs and capabilities." The implication hung heavily in the air. She didn't believe he could afford what he was asking to see, and worse, she didn't believe he deserved to even look at it. "A Rolex Daytona isn't just something you try on," Karen continued, warming to her lecture. "Our clients typically have established relationships with us, financial portfolios we're familiar with. We don't simply hand over pieces of this caliber to casual browsers." Her gaze flicked dismissively over his hoodie again. Throughout the showroom, the discomfort was growing. Jason, the young associate, had finally managed to catch the eye of Thomas, the store manager, who had emerged from his office and was taking in the scene with dawning horror. Thomas began moving quickly across the floor, but before he could reach them, Karen delivered what she clearly intended as her final word on the matter. "Perhaps you could come back another time," she suggested, making a subtle shooing motion with her hand. "Maybe with an appointment and—" She paused, looking him up and down. "Dressed more appropriately for the environment. Luxury shopping is an experience, sir, and it requires a certain preparation." The boutique had fallen completely silent. Even the couple who had been whispering were now watching in stunned silence. In that moment, it wasn't just Karen's words that were offensive, it was the entire worldview they represented, a perspective that judged worth based on appearance and preconceptions rather than reality. Jordan's expression remained remarkably composed, though those who knew him well might have recognized the set of his jaw, the same expression he had worn on the court when an opponent had made the mistake of challenging him or talking trash. It wasn't anger so much as focus, the mental shifting of gears that had preceded some of his most legendary performances. "I see," he said simply, his voice so quiet that Karen had to lean slightly forward to hear him. "And what exactly would appropriate preparation look like in your opinion? What would qualify someone like me to look at a watch in this store?" The emphasis on "someone like me" was subtle but unmistakable. Karen, missing the significance entirely, took his question as genuine interest in her advice. "Well," she began, seemingly pleased to educate him, "our typical Rolex clients have established careers, proper attire, suits generally, and they understand the protocol of luxury purchasing. They don't simply walk in and ask to handle pieces worth more than most people's cars." She smiled tightly, as if she'd done him a favor with this insight. Thomas had nearly reached them now, his face pale with recognition of both the customer and the disaster unfolding. But before he could intervene, Jordan nodded thoughtfully at Karen's words, reached into the pocket of his hoodie, and pulled out a black American Express Centurion card, the invitation-only card famously known as the Black Card. "Would this help establish my credentials?" he asked quietly, placing it on the counter between them. "Or should I call Robert Rosen directly? We played golf at his country club last month." Karen's expression froze as she stared at the black card lying on the glass countertop. The American Express Centurion card, commonly known as the Black Card, was no ordinary piece of plastic. It was invitation only, required millions in annual spending, and came with a financial profile that boutiques like Rosen and Shire dreamed of attracting. Yet her prejudice ran deeper than logic, causing her to grasp for explanations that wouldn't require her to reconsider her initial judgment. "I see," she said, her voice tight as she made no move to pick up the card. "And how did you come to possess this?" The implication hung in the air, toxic and unmistakable. Not, "Is this yours?" but, "How did you get this?" suggesting something improper in his possession of it. A collective intake of breath whispered through the boutique. Even customers who hadn't initially recognized Michael Jordan could sense the confrontation building to a dangerous climax. The young sales associate, Jason, had gone completely pale, his horror at Karen's behavior evident on his face. Jordan's expression remained composed, though something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He'd faced this type of treatment before, even at the height of his fame and wealth. The assumption that black success was somehow suspect, temporary, or unearned was nothing new to him. "It's registered in my name," he replied evenly. "As I mentioned, I'm interested in the Daytona. If you're uncomfortable showing it to me, perhaps someone else can assist." Karen bristled at what she perceived as a challenge to her authority. Thomas, the manager, had finally reached them, his expression a mix of mortification and panic as he recognized exactly who his senior associate was mistreating. "Mr. Jordan," Thomas began, his voice tight with controlled panic, "I'm Thomas Hanley, the store manager. It's an honor to have you in our boutique today. I'd be happy to personally show you the Platinum Daytona you're interested in." Karen's head snapped toward Thomas, then back to the man she'd been dismissing. The color drained from her face as recognition finally dawned. Michael Jordan, six-time NBA champion, global icon, and billionaire businessman, stood before her in her boutique, and she had just suggested he couldn't afford a watch that represented a fraction of a percent of his net worth. "Jordan?" she repeated, her voice faint. "As in—" "Yes, Michael Jordan," Thomas confirmed quickly, "one of our city's greatest legends and a valued potential client." The emphasis on valued carried a clear rebuke, but Karen, rather than accepting her mistake with grace, seemed determined to justify herself. Years of entitlement and unchecked bias had made humility an unfamiliar concept. "Well," she said stiffly, "how was I supposed to know? Mr. Jordan isn't dressed like our typical clientele." She gestured vaguely toward his casual attire. In my experience, serious buyers present themselves appropriately. Jordan raised an eyebrow. And what exactly is appropriate, in your view? I'm curious about the dress code for spending $75,000 in this establishment. Several customers had abandoned any pretense of shopping and were openly watching the exchange. One woman had her phone out, seemingly recording the interaction discreetly. News of this confrontation would spread quickly through Chicago's social circles. Thomas tried to salvage the situation, stepping slightly in front of Karen. We have no dress code, Mr. Jordan. All clients are welcome exactly as they are. Karen misspoke. He shot her a warning glance that she either missed or chose to ignore. I did not misspeak, Karen insisted, doubling down despite the career-threatening quicksand she was wading into. I was simply following store protocol for unfamiliar customers showing interest in our premium pieces. It's my job to pre-qualify clients. Pre-qualify, Jordan repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. And what criteria were you using to pre-qualify me today? His calm demeanor made the question all the more pointed. The boutique had gone completely silent. Even the background music seemed to have faded away, though it was still playing softly through the hidden speakers. Karen realized she was trapped in her own prejudice, but couldn't find the humility to admit it. Experience, she said defensively. 15 years of experience in luxury retail. I know our clientele. Apparently not all of them, Jordan replied, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel that those who had faced him on the basketball court would have recognized immediately. Thomas stepped in again, desperation evident in his attempt to recover the situation. Mr. Jordan, please accept our sincere apologies for this misunderstanding. I would be honored to show you the Platinum Daytona personally. We also have several other exceptional pieces that just arrived, which might interest a collector of your caliber. But Jordan's attention remained on Karen, who still hadn't acknowledged her error or offered any apology. Before we move on, he said quietly, I'm interested in understanding something. When I walked in, what specifically made you decide I couldn't afford that watch? The question hung in the air, simple but devastating. Karen shifted uncomfortably, aware that every ear in the boutique was waiting for her answer. The truth, that she had made assumptions based entirely on racial bias, was too damning to admit, even to herself. It wasn't about affordability, she attempted, though her earlier comments had made it clear that was exactly her concern. It was about ensuring the right match between client and timepiece. Some watches are investments, not just accessories. I'm well aware, Jordan replied. My watch collection is currently valued at over 8 figures. Each piece was selected as both an investment and an appreciation of craftsmanship. He paused, letting that information sink in. But you couldn't have known that. What you did know, what you saw, was the color of my skin and the casual nature of my clothes, and you made your assessment based on that alone. The accusation, delivered without anger but with unwavering conviction, left no room for denial. Several customers nodded silently, witnesses to the undeniable truth of his words. Karen's composure finally cracked. That's not fair, she protested, her voice rising slightly. You're twisting my words. This isn't about race. It's about presentation. Anyone dressed as you are would have received the same treatment. An older gentleman standing nearby cleared his throat. That's not true, he said firmly. I came in last week wearing golf attire after a round at Butler National, and you showed me the new Patek collection without hesitation. He nodded respectfully toward Jordan. It's an honor, by the way, Mr. Jordan. My grandkids still have your posters on their walls. The supportive comment from another customer seemed to break something in Karen's resistance. She looked around, suddenly aware that the entire boutique, colleagues and customers alike, were united in their judgment of her behavior. Thomas seized the moment. Karen, why don't you take your break now? I'll personally assist Mr. Jordan. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. For a moment, it seemed Karen might argue further, but self-preservation finally overcame her pride. With a tight nod, she turned and walked stiffly toward the back of the store, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor in the uncomfortable silence. As she disappeared through the staff door, Thomas turned to Jordan with genuine remorse. Mr. Jordan, I cannot apologize enough for what just happened. Please know that her views do not represent our establishment. Now, would you still like to see the Platinum Daytona? Jordan nodded, his focus shifting from the confrontation back to his original purpose. Yes, he said simply, and perhaps a few other pieces as well. I find I'm in the mood to make some significant purchases today. Thomas's relief was palpable as he unlocked the display case and carefully lifted out the watch in question, a stunning platinum masterpiece with an ice blue dial that caught the light brilliantly. But as he presented it to the basketball legend, neither man was under any illusion that this was just another sale. What had happened in those few minutes would have consequences that would extend far beyond this day. By the time Michael Jordan left Rosen and Shire that afternoon, word of the confrontation had already begun spreading through Chicago's luxury retail community. The basketball legend had spent nearly 2 hours in the boutique after Karen's departure, examining not just the Platinum Daytona that had prompted his visit, but several other exceptional timepieces as well. Thomas had provided impeccable service, his expertise and genuine respect, creating a stark contrast to Karen's earlier behavior. Jordan ultimately purchased the Daytona along with 2 other watches, a limited edition Patek Philippe and a vintage Audemars Piguet, bringing his total spending to just over $300,000. Before leaving, he had written a personal check rather than using his black card, signing it with the distinctive flourish that had appeared on everything from Nike contracts to championship memorabilia. Thomas had accepted it with trembling hands, aware that this transaction would likely be discussed in hushed tones throughout Chicago's luxury retail circles for years to come. Karen remained in the staff room for the duration of Jordan's visit, her initial indignation gradually giving way to the dawning horror of recognition. She had insulted not just any customer, but Michael Jordan, a man whose name was synonymous with Chicago itself, whose statue stood outside the United Center, and whose personal wealth could buy and sell Rosen and Shire many times over. It was only after Jordan had left that she emerged, her face pale and her usual confidence noticeably absent. "Is he gone?" she asked Jason, the young associate who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "Yes," Jason replied, his usual deference to her seniority notably diminished. "He bought the Daytona, and a Patek, and a vintage Royal Oak, over $300,000 total." He delivered this information not as celebration of a major sale, but as evidence in a damning case against her judgment. Karen flinched visibly. "I didn't recognize him," she said weakly, as if this excused everything that had transpired. "That's not the point," Jason replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "You shouldn't treat anyone that way, recognizable or not." Before Karen could respond, Thomas emerged from his office where he had been making a series of urgent phone calls. His expression was grim as he approached Karen. "My office, now," he said simply. The boutique closed at 7 that evening. By 7:30, every luxury retailer in downtown Chicago had heard some version of what had transpired. By 8, the story had reached Robert Rosen himself, the boutique's owner, and a well-connected figure in both Chicago's business community and its social elite. By 9, Rosen was on the phone with Jordan's team, attempting damage control with one of the city's most powerful figures. Karen arrived home that evening in a state of numbness. The meeting with Thomas had been brief, but devastating. She hadn't been fired, not yet, but she had been suspended pending a review by the owners. Thomas had made it abundantly clear that her future with the company hung by the thinnest of threads. "This isn't just about insulting a celebrity," he had told her, his disappointment evident. "It's about the pattern of behavior that led to this moment. How many other customers have you prejudged this way? How much business have we lost because someone didn't fit your narrow definition of what a luxury customer should look like?" Karen had no answer. For the first time in her 15-year career, she found herself forced to confront the biases that had informed her interactions with countless customers. The realization was profoundly uncomfortable. She poured herself a large glass of wine and scrolled through her phone, wondering if news of the incident had spread beyond the boutique. What she found made her blood run cold. A shaky video titled, "Racist Karen Don't Know Who Michael Jordan Is," had already accumulated over 50,000 views on social media. The footage, clearly taken by one of the customers in the store, captured the worst moments of her interaction with Jordan. Her dismissive tone, her suggestion that he couldn't afford the watch, her implication that he needed to dress appropriately to shop there. The comments beneath the video were unforgiving, a tide of public indignation swelling against her. Some commenters claimed to recognize her, naming her explicitly and calling for her termination. Others shared stories of similar treatment they had experienced in luxury settings. The hashtag #, Karen can't sell to Jordan, was beginning to trend locally. Karen barely slept that night, her mind replaying the encounter again and again, searching for a version where she wasn't entirely at fault. By morning, her anxiety had reached a fever pitch. She checked her phone immediately upon waking, finding dozens of notifications, messages from colleagues, texts from friends who had seen the video, and an email from Thomas requesting that she not come to the store until further notice. The most ominous message came from Robert Rosen himself. "We need to discuss yesterday's incident. Please be at my office at 10 a.m. sharp." Karen dressed with particular care that morning, selecting her most professional outfit as if proper attire could somehow undo the damage her prejudice had caused. She arrived at Rosen's downtown office 15 minutes early, her stomach in knots as she announced herself to his assistant. "He's expecting you," the young woman said coolly, her tone suggesting that she too had seen the video. Robert Rosen's corner office overlooked the Chicago River, the expansive windows framing a view that normally would have impressed visitors. Today, Karen barely noticed it. Rosen himself sat behind an imposing desk, his expression grave. To Karen's surprise, Thomas was also present, along with a woman she recognized as the company's head of human resources. "Sit down, Karen," Rosen said without preamble. "I assume you understand why we're here." Karen nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, sir, about yesterday's incident with Mr. Jordan." "Incident," Rosen repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I sit, and from what I've seen in the video that's now been viewed over 500,000 times, it looks a lot more like blatant racial profiling in my store, wearing my brand's reputation." Karen flinched. "I didn't recognize him," she began, but Rosen cut her off with a sharp gesture. "That's the third time you've offered that excuse, according to Thomas. And for the third time, I'll tell you that it doesn't matter whether you recognized Michael Jordan or not. What matters is how you treat every person who walks through our doors." The HR director nodded in agreement. "Our company policy is clear, Karen. We provide the same level of service to all potential customers, regardless of how they're dressed or what assumptions we might make about their purchasing power." "I was trying to protect the store's interests," Karen protested weakly. "High-end pieces like that Daytona are meant to be sold," Rosen interrupted, "to anyone who can afford them and appreciates their value. Michael Jordan is not only one of the wealthiest individuals in Chicago, but he's also a serious watch collector, something you might have discovered if you bothered to engage with him respectfully rather than dismissing him based on his appearance." Karen fell silent, the full weight of her error finally settling on her shoulders. "This morning," Rosen continued, "I had a conversation with Michael Jordan. Do you know what he said to me?" Karen shook her head, her heart racing. "He said he wasn't angry at you personally. He said he's dealt with this kind of treatment his entire life, even at the height of his fame and success. He said what bothered him most wasn't that you didn't recognize him, it was that you so quickly decided he didn't belong in that space." The room fell silent as the impact of those words sank in. Karen felt tears threatening to form, but fought them back, aware that crying now would seem self-pitying rather than genuinely remorseful. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rosen exchanged glances with the HR director before answering. "Normally, this would be immediate termination. Your actions violated multiple company policies and have created a significant PR problem for us." Karen nodded, already mentally calculating what losing her job would mean financially. "However," Rosen continued, "Mr. Jordan suggested something different. He believes, and I agree, that firing you would solve nothing. It wouldn't address the underlying issue, and it wouldn't help you understand the impact of your actions." Karen looked up, confusion temporarily replacing her dread. "I don't understand." "Instead of termination," the HR director explained, "you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll be transferred to our community outreach program, specifically focusing on expanding our customer base, beyond traditional luxury demographics. In other words, Thomas added, you'll be working directly with the communities and individuals you've previously overlooked or dismissed. You'll learn about their spending power, their taste, their legitimate place in the luxury market. And, Rosen concluded, you'll be doing this under the mentorship of a consultant who specializes in diversity and inclusion in luxury retail. Mr. Jordan has generously offered to connect us with someone from his team who handles these issues for his various business ventures. Karen sat in stunned silence, trying to process this unexpected turn. It wasn't a termination, but in many ways, this was a far more profound consequence, a complete dismantling of the professional identity she had built over 15 years. One more thing, Rosen added, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. Tomorrow morning, you have an appointment. Mr. Jordan is expecting you. The Jordan brand headquarters in downtown Chicago occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass and steel building. Karen stood in the lobby the following morning, her hands clasped tightly together to stop them from trembling. The security guard at the desk had checked her ID, confirmed her appointment, and asked her to wait while he notified Mr. Jordan's office of her arrival. Karen had spent the previous evening in a state of anxious preparation, researching Michael Jordan's business empire, his philanthropic endeavors, and his history as both an athlete and entrepreneur. What she discovered had been humbling. The man she had so casually dismissed as unable to afford a luxury watch was not just a basketball legend, but a billionaire businessman whose Nike partnership alone had revolutionized athlete endorsements forever. His various business ventures employed thousands, and his charitable foundation had provided millions in support to underprivileged communities. Ms. Whitfield, a young woman in a crisp suit, approached. I'm Danielle, Mr. Jordan's executive assistant. He'll see you now. Karen followed Danielle into an elevator that whisked them to the top floor. The corridors they walked through were lined with memorabilia from Jordan's illustrious career, framed jerseys, championship trophies behind glass, and iconic photographs capturing legendary moments on the court. Each item they passed deepened Karen's mortification over her behavior at the boutique. Danielle led her to a spacious corner office and opened the door. Ms. Whitfield is here, Mr. Jordan. Michael Jordan sat behind a large desk, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that made Karen acutely aware of how thoroughly she had misjudged him based on his casual attire in the boutique. On his wrist gleamed the platinum Daytona she had refused to show him, a silent reminder of her error in judgment. Thank you for coming, Ms. Whitfield, Jordan said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. Please, have a seat. Karen sat down, her rehearsed apology suddenly stuck in her throat as she faced the man she had insulted so deeply just 2 days earlier. Mr. Jordan, she began, but he raised a hand, gently cutting her off. Before you say anything, I want to show you something, he said, pressing a button on his desk phone. Danielle, could you send them in now? The door opened, and 5 people entered the office, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed professionally and ranging in age from their late 20s to early 60s. Karen didn't recognize any of them. Ms. Whitfield, Jordan continued, I'd like you to meet some members of my executive team. This is Marcus, my CFO, Aisha, who runs our digital marketing division, David, my head of product development, Taylor, who oversees our community engagement initiatives, and Robert, my chief legal counsel. Each person nodded as they were introduced. Karen noticed that all 5 were Black professionals, and realization began to dawn on her. What do you notice about my team, Ms. Whitfield? Jordan asked, his tone conversational, but his eyes intent. Karen swallowed hard. They're all highly accomplished executives, she said carefully. Yes, they are, Jordan agreed. And if they walked into Rosen and Shire dressed casually on their day off, would they receive the same treatment I did? The question hung in the air, its implication impossible to dodge. Karen felt the weight of 10 eyes on her as she struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further incriminate her. I made assumptions, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Assumptions I had no right to make. Jordan nodded, then gestured for his team to leave. They filed out silently, each giving Karen a look that contained not anger, but something perhaps more difficult to bear, disappointment mixed with recognition. They had all, at some point, been on the receiving end of similar treatment. When the door closed behind them, Jordan leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Do you know why I didn't push for you to be fired, Ms. Whitfield? Karen shook her head. Because firing you would have solved nothing, he explained. You would have left convinced you were the victim of cancel culture or political correctness gone too far. You would have learned nothing. And the next Karen Whitfield at the next luxury boutique would continue the cycle with the next person who doesn't fit their narrow image of success. Karen flinched at hearing her name used as a category rather than an individual identity, but she couldn't deny the accuracy of his assessment. Instead, Jordan continued, I saw an opportunity. People like you, and please understand I mean that in the broadest sense, people who hold positions of gatekeeping in luxury spaces have enormous power to either reinforce bias or help dismantle it. He gestured toward the wall of windows overlooking Chicago. Out there are thousands of successful Black entrepreneurs, executives, athletes, doctors, lawyers, and artists with the means and desire to purchase luxury goods. Yet many avoid high-end boutiques precisely because of experiences like the one you created. For the first time, Karen began to understand the true impact of her behavior, not just on one customer, not just on her career, but on an entire system of exclusion she had unwittingly helped perpetuate. Mr. Jordan, I am truly sorry, she said, the words finally coming from a place of genuine remorse rather than self-preservation. I've spent the last 2 days trying to understand how I could have behaved that way, and the truth is uncomfortable. I held biases I didn't even recognize in myself. Jordan nodded, his expression softening slightly. Recognition is the first step, but it can't be the last. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder which he slid across to her. Inside, you'll find details of a 6-month program I've arranged with Robert Rosen's approval. You'll be working with Taylor's team on a special project, developing customer service training specifically designed to address unconscious bias in luxury retail. Karen opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the document that outlined her new role. It would require her to step out of the sales floor environment she had controlled for 15 years and into a world of community outreach, education, and self-examination. Why me? She asked quietly. After what I did, why would you want me involved in something like this? Because you're exactly who needs to be involved, Jordan replied simply. You're not a bad person, Ms. Whitfield. You're someone who developed bad habits in an environment that rewarded them. You learned to equate worth with appearance, to measure people by superficial standards, and to guard luxury as if it were your personal domain, rather than a product to be sold. He gestured toward the folder. Now, you have the chance to unlearn those habits and help others do the same. Your experience, both as someone who perpetuated bias and now as someone confronting it, makes you uniquely qualified for this work. Karen sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what was being offered, not just a second chance at employment, but an opportunity for redemption, for growth, for becoming something more than she had been. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, vulnerability replacing her usual certainty. Jordan smiled for the first time since she'd entered his office. Now that, he said, is the right place to start. Certainty is the enemy of growth. He stood, signaling that their meeting was coming to an end. The program begins next Monday. Between now and then, I suggest you spend some time in neighborhoods you've never visited, in stores where you might be the one who doesn't look like she belongs. Experience what it feels like to be on the other side of that judgment. Karen rose on unsteady legs, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Thank you, she said quietly. Not for saving my job, but for... She struggled to find the words. For seeing something in me worth salvaging when I gave you every reason not to. Jordan walked her to the door, pausing before opening it. Ms. Whitfield, there's one more thing you should know. Karen looked up at him questioningly. That Rolex Daytona you didn't think I could afford? He glanced down at the platinum timepiece gleaming on his wrist. It's being featured in the new Jordan brand advertising campaign launching next week. The tagline is, Beyond Assumptions. He opened the door, where Danielle waited to escort Karen back to the lobby. Your journey toward unlearning bias won't be comfortable, he said as a parting thought, but nothing worth doing ever is. As Karen left the building and stepped into the bright Chicago morning, she felt something she hadn't expected, not shame or regret, though those emotions still lingered, but a curious sense of lightness, as if she had been carrying a heavy burden without recognizing its weight until now. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of becoming something more than she had been, of growing beyond the limitations she had placed on others and, unknowingly, on herself. The lesson had been painful, public, and profoundly humbling, but as she hailed a taxi and gave the driver an address in a neighborhood she had never visited before, Karen Whitfield realized it might also be the most valuable lesson she had ever received. 6 months after the incident that changed her life, Karen Whitfield stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, facing an audience of over 300 retail professionals from across the luxury sector. Behind her, a large screen displayed the logo for the Inclusive Luxury Initiative, a new program jointly sponsored by the Jordan brand and Rosen & Shire. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. 6 months ago, I was the protagonist in a viral video that many of you probably saw. I was the racist Karen who didn't think Michael Jordan could afford a Rolex. A ripple of recognition moved through the audience. Despite the passage of time, the incident remained infamous in luxury retail circles. "What you saw in that video was real," Karen continued. "It wasn't taken out of context or edited to make me look bad. It was an authentic moment that revealed biases I didn't even know I carried, biases that had been shaping my interactions with customers for 15 years without my conscious awareness." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The easy part was recognizing I had made a terrible mistake. The harder part was confronting why I made it. What assumptions led me to look at one of the wealthiest and most recognizable figures in sports history and decide he didn't belong in my store? What invisible criteria was I using to determine who deserved my attention and respect?" The ballroom was silent, her words striking uncomfortably close to home for many in attendance. Karen had spent enough years in luxury retail to know that her attitudes had not been unique to her. "Over the past 6 months, I've been on a journey, both professional and personal, to understand and dismantle those biases. And I've learned that what happened that day wasn't just about me failing to recognize a celebrity. It was about a systemic problem in our industry, one that costs us billions in untapped revenue, and, more importantly, perpetuates harmful exclusion." She clicked to the next slide, which displayed a striking statistic. Black consumers spend $1.2 trillion annually, yet 70% report feeling unwelcome or ignored in luxury retail environments. "These numbers tell a clear story," Karen explained. "Our industry is leaving money on the table because we've created environments where only certain customers feel welcome. We've trained our sales associates, as I was trained, to make split-second judgments based on appearance, to prioritize customers who fit a narrow profile of what we think wealth looks like." She clicked through several more slides showing research data gathered during the project she had helped develop. "What we found is that these biases don't just affect Black customers, though they're often the most acutely impacted. They affect anyone who doesn't match our mental image of a luxury consumer. Young entrepreneurs in casual clothes, wealthy tourists from cultures with different style norms, tech billionaires in hoodies and sneakers." A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience at the last example. "The program we're launching today isn't about sensitivity training or political correctness," Karen continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "It's about business intelligence. It's about recognizing that in today's diverse economy, wealth doesn't look like what it did 50 years ago. It doesn't dress the same, speak the same, or shop the same. And retailers who cling to outdated notions of who belongs in luxury spaces aren't just perpetuating bias, they're committing a fundamental business error." She moved from behind the podium, taking a more conversational stance at the front of the stage. "I want to share something personal with you all. When Mr. Jordan first proposed this program, I accepted it because I had no choice. It was this or unemployment. I approached it as punishment, as something to endure until I could return to normal. What I didn't expect was how profoundly it would change me." Karen gestured to a table near the front, where several people sat watching her presentation with evident pride. Among them, Michael Jordan himself, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Over these months, I've had the privilege of working with extraordinary professionals who have patiently educated me, challenged me, and ultimately shown me a better way to approach not just my work, but my entire worldview. I've visited communities I had previously avoided, spoken with successful people I would have once dismissed based on appearance, and confronted uncomfortable truths about myself and our industry. She clicked to a new slide showing the Rolex Daytona campaign that had indeed featured Jordan wearing the platinum watch she had refused to show him. The Beyond Assumptions campaign had been a massive success, with its message resonating far beyond the luxury watch market. This campaign became a cultural moment precisely because it touched on something many people have experienced: the assumptions we make about others, who belongs where, who can afford what, who deserves our respect and attention, aren't just personal failings. They're part of larger patterns that shape our society in ways that harm us all. Karen returned to the podium for her conclusion, her expression solemn but hopeful. Today, we're launching a comprehensive training program designed specifically for luxury retail. It includes interactive workshops, data on diverse consumer markets, techniques for recognizing and countering unconscious bias, and metrics for measuring improvement. But at its core, it's about something much simpler: seeing people, truly seeing them, not through the lens of our assumptions, but as they actually are. She looked out at the audience, making eye contact with various attendees. I know some of you might be thinking what I would have thought 6 months ago, that this is unnecessary, that you don't have these biases, that your stores already welcome everyone. Too, you especially, I say, be brave enough to question those certainties. The most dangerous biases are the ones we don't recognize in ourselves. Karen clicked to her final slide, which showed a before and after comparison of sales data from Rosen & Shire locations that had piloted the training program. The results speak for themselves. Stores that implemented these approaches saw an average increase of 23% in new customer acquisition and 31% in sales to demographic groups previously underrepresented in their customer base. This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that matters deeply. It's about smart business in a diverse world. As she concluded her presentation, Karen felt a sense of closure. The humiliation of that viral moment had transformed into something unexpected: a purpose, a mission, and ultimately, a gift. I never expected to be standing here, she admitted. I never thought my greatest professional failure would lead to my most meaningful work. But that's the beauty of truly learning from our mistakes. They can lead us to places we never imagined. She gestured toward Jordan, acknowledging his role in her journey. 6 months ago, I had the distinct privilege of being completely wrong about someone. Instead of responding with anger, he responded with an opportunity for growth. Not everyone gets that chance, and I'm determined not to waste it. As the audience rose for a standing ovation, Karen felt a complex mixture of emotions: humility for how far she still had to go, pride in how far she had come, and profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. Later, at the reception following her presentation, Jordan approached her with a warm smile. "How does it feel," he asked, "to transform a moment of shame into something meaningful?" Karen considered the question carefully. "Redemptive," she replied finally, "though I know the work is just beginning." Jordan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's always been the secret," he said quietly. "Whether in basketball or business or personal growth, the work never really ends. You just get better at doing it." As they stood there, several retail executives approached, eager to discuss implementing the program in their own stores. Karen engaged with them confidently, no longer the racist Karen of viral infamy, but a woman with expertise born from hard-won experience. The incident that had nearly destroyed her career had instead transformed it, giving her work a depth and purpose it had previously lacked. More importantly, it had transformed her, breaking open calcified assumptions and allowing new understanding to take root. "Have you ever been underestimated or prejudged based on your appearance?" Karen asked the audience as a final thought during the Q&A session. "Has anyone ever made assumptions about what you could afford, where you belonged, or what you were capable of?" Share those experiences with someone who needs to hear them. Because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we're brave enough to speak our truths and listen to the truths of others. As the event concluded and people began to file out of the ballroom, many stopped to share their own stories with Karen, retailers confessing similar biases they wanted to address, customers describing painful experiences of exclusion, executives seeking guidance on changing their corporate cultures. Each conversation confirmed what she had come to understand over the past 6 months. Her story, though deeply personal, was part of a much larger narrative about who we see as valuable and worthy of respect. The journey that had begun with a moment of shameful bias had evolved into something far more powerful, a movement toward a more inclusive vision of luxury, success, and belonging. And though Karen knew she would never fully shed the Karen label that had defined her viral moment, she had found a way to transform it into something unexpectedly meaningful, not just for herself, but for an industry long overdue for change. Stories like this one happen every day across America. They don't all involve celebrities like Michael Jordan, but they share the same painful pattern of prejudice and assumptions based on appearance. We've seen how one moment of judgment can reveal deeper biases we might not even recognize in ourselves. Karen's journey from that viral confrontation to genuine understanding shows us that even the most difficult moments can become opportunities for growth when we're willing to honestly examine our actions. This story matters because it reflects experiences so many of you have shared in the comments of our previous videos. The feeling of being sized up and dismissed before you've even had a chance to speak. The frustration of knowing you belong in a space while someone else has already decided you don't. But what's truly powerful is what happens next. How we respond to these moments defines not just our character, but the world we're collectively creating. Michael Jordan could have simply used his power and influence to have Karen fired. Instead, he chose a path that created real change, not just for her, but for an entire industry. That's the real lesson here. When faced with prejudice, we have choices. We can respond with anger, which is completely justified. We can walk away. Or we can, when possible, create opportunities for growth and understanding. We want to hear your stories now. Have you ever been judged or underestimated based on your appearance? How did you handle it? Was there ever a moment when someone's perception of you completely changed after they learned who you really were? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If you found value in this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge our perspectives and help us grow. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. Remember that respect isn't about status. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone we meet. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It speaks through our actions and how we treat others. Until next time, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the comments.